very beautiful community. And we're going to talk about some Tesla owners debating whether they should ditch their vehicle because they do not like Elon Musk. Now, that's only going to be the predicament of a small number of people on the channels. On the main channel, let's say people who watched the last video, it might be 1,000 Tesla owners in the audience. Here it's going to be much, much less, could be 100. So why talk about this? Well, because when our politics slides off the rails, there are going to be companies implicated with that politics, and that's going to put us to a decision. So we're going to face more decisions like the decision that Tesla owners are facing right now. So let's talk about it a little bit. One thing worth saying is that, of course, this is a very privileged position to be in if one is a Tesla owner and is debating giving up one's Tesla. And it's also important that there are much bigger fish to fry in your ethical life than making this decision. So it's important to understand that we have a tendency in our culture to overrate the political significance of ethical consumer decisions. Now, the way this conversation will go will really track a basic distinction between two ways of relating to politics. The first relationship with politics is an effective relationship where you say, I'm going to do this or not do this depending on what are the practical consequences down the line. The other relationship with politics is expressive. And here you might say, I'll put my name on this or not, depending on whether I want to be ethically associated with it, no matter what the practical consequences are in the world. So let's take an example. Imagine that you are, while shocked by the barbarism of what happened on October 7th, 2023, are profoundly shocked by Israel's response to pulverization of Gaza, the needless destruction of tens of thousands of lives, and you are trying to reevaluate if you should continue buying candles from a little candle company on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. And you discover that the founders of the company are Yaniv, Yanir, and Yael, and that they are actually against Israel's policy in Gaza. They're against Netanyahu, but you kind of still feel, so this is an extreme expressive politics position I'm giving you, you know what, I still don't feel good about buying Israeli stuff, so I'm going to stop buying these candles, even though I don't know what these people did wrong. They didn't do anything wrong, invent the candle company. Now that's given a practical, effective relationship to politics as applied to that case. Here someone might say, well, I don't see any problem with buying these candles. Now if Yaniv, Yanir, and Yael moved to the illegal and illegitimate settlements, and if I read in the paper that they on the side got a little bit involved in some vigilante low-level ethnic cleansing activities, yeah, I'm not going to buy the candles, but that's going to be an effective politics decision. So you see the difference. Let's steal an example. I think it's a stolen example, unless I've made it up, but it doesn't matter. I think it's a stolen example from the Israeli philosopher Avishai Margalit, who talks about this distinction, I think in a book of his called Compromise and Rotten Compromise from a few years ago, a book I highly recommend. And he says, look, would you accept to get paid to vote for a political party that repulses you if you know that your vote is not going to make any change in the world because they're not going to get any seat anywhere anyway? And the expressive politics position is more drawn to saying, no, not my name, not in my name. I'm not going to write these people in on the ballot paper, no matter whether you give me $10,000 for it or not. But then the effective relationship with politics comes along and says, actually, I see this differently. I'll take the $10,000. I'll vote for these horrible, horrible people. and I'll just donate the 10,000 bucks to their political opponents. And in fact, my voting for these horrible people is going to be bad news for them. So I'm going to do it. So you see now, that's a difference. And what you want in a society isn't one or the other, but a mix of the two that's healthy. We have had, in recent history, an unhealthy mix of the two, with the expressive politics becoming too dominant. What you want is perhaps effective politics being preponderant, but a healthy balance of the two. You don't just want one or the other. Now let's jump into Tesla talk for a bit, be more practical, and then we'll get a bit more philosophical about ethics and consumer decisions, if that's okay. Now the first thing you've got to bear in mind, surely, is that it's a pretty weird move to get rid of your Tesla and buy a non-EV car instead, because then you're going to have to reckon with the evils of the fossil fuel industry. On top of that, it's worth considering that when you divest from your Tesla, somebody else invests. It's not that you get your money back from Tesla or that the car disappears. It's rather that Ricky down the road is going to have your Tesla. Is probably going to pay Tesla for maintenance and energy and will drive it around as a kind of symbol. So it's not that that car is going to disappear from the world. It's that it's just going to be there, but it's going to be not you in it. And then another consideration worth bearing in mind, of course, is just the climate cost of producing a new EV vehicle for you to purchase. That's also worth bearing in mind. Now, having put these remarks on the table, it does seem like there are some strong reasons to try to sort of drive your, Tesla on until it's no longer of decent use, and then get rid of it. And that might mean you put a sticker on it saying, I like EVs, but not Musk. I bought this before Musk went crazy, and so on. So that kind of looks plausible. But whether you do that depends on quite a few things about your nature as an ethical consumer. Let's talk about that more deeply. Because here is a dilemma that people are going to feel. Surely, if I'm getting rid of my Tesla, I have to compare that not with not getting rid of it, but with what I could do instead with the money I'm going to lose on the transaction and with the energy I'm going to invest in it. What if I make a donation to a political cause or a climate cause? What if I do something constructive in my local community with that energy? What if I use the little bit of money I might lose and the energy to go toward making my own house more emissions friendly? And then you kind of run into a problem. At what point does this not become an infinite regress of considerations, such that I become tormented by an attempt to arrive at an impartial adequateness toward all the ethical pools in the world? At what point do I not become a kind of, demonstration of a misanthropic utilitarian nightmare where I, beset myself with self-directed emotional violence in the face of an infinite regress of infinitesimal moral considerations as a consumer that I endlessly draw up on a 5-meter wide whiteboard. And here I want to give two really important bits of advice as a philosopher and as a very minor public intellectual. The first bit of advice is that impartiality is a bogus goal in ethical response. It's a misanthropic goal. There is no way you're going to be ethically adequate in your response and proportionately adequate in your response to everything going on in the world. In fact, if you tried that even some of the way, you'd lose your mind, and you'd lose your mind because you're actually a human being with a moral conscience. So this stuff needs to be organic, It needs to be a product of your biography, a product of your sensibility. I can care about that and this, but not all the things out there, right? These 9 things I'm thinking of, I care about 2. The rest I'll leave for others. Now, you don't want to be in a completely inadequate relationship with these other things, but you can't hold everything. It's just impossible. What you want to strive for is avoiding sort of glaring inconsistencies of response, right? So if you have nothing compassionate to say about what's going on in Gaza, and you might be compassionate about what happened on October 7th too, of course, 2023. But if you have no compassion for what's happening in Gaza, but you endlessly complain about how the world doesn't have enough compassion for Ukraine, there might be a little bit of a problem. Or the other way around, right? But even with people like that, my recommendation is not to say, you silly person, how can you think that without thinking this? Fix yourself, and I'm not going to take your position on Ukraine serious until your position on the Middle East becomes serious. I don't recommend that. I actually recommend saying, well, look, that person is responding with a modicum of adequacy here, but not there. So let's start with praising the adequate bit and then see if they can build on that, or maybe they won't. That's how you approach it. The idea that you impose on people an expectation of impartiality of moral response is not just unrealistic, but it's a form of hatred of our species, right? And a second consideration that's very important is that you don't beat yourself up morally by always thinking that you've got to prioritize moral considerations over non-moral considerations. I mean, it's a ridiculous thing to think, right? If you are reading a history book and you get outraged that the artist Giacometti had long, late dinners because you feel he should have spent more time on his art, you're a weirdo, right? If you're reading an art history book and you say, oh my God, look at that, 2.5-hour dinners, unbelievable. Well, he had 8 glasses of wine, he had 7 courses. How could he have done that? There's nobody better than him in the 20th century at manipulating our sense of spatial proportion. Nobody makes tiny things look more infinitely large, and nobody makes infinitely large things look more tiny than Giacometti. Given that he can do that in his drawings and in some of his sculpture, although he never arrived where he wanted to arrive because there wasn't a place for him to arrive. But that's crazy. You're completely deranged if you're saying that Giacometti shouldn't have enjoyed himself. He worked bloody hard anyway, right? So that's a normal example, right? Where you're not going to say somebody doesn't care about their art just because they have a long dinner. With ethics, it's the same. Just because we put down some ethical considerations and prioritize play, fun, joy, or casual stuff over some kind of ethical pool, that doesn't mean we're an unethical person. What makes us an ethical person is that there's a sense of balance and flexibility and proportion in our ethical response, which of course means that sometimes we prioritize other values because there's other values in the world, and the world's a beautiful place. So I'm saying this especially to this community because this community is a bit at risk of morally beating itself up for not caring about the world morally consistently enough. And I'm telling you, try to be gentle on that part of you that doesn't want to be gentle on you, right? Don't engage in self-directed emotional violence. You don't get ethically better by being rigid with yourself. You don't get ethically better by punishing yourself. You may get ethically richer by relating to these issues, by exploring and dancing, however. Now let's say a little bit about expressive politics now. But before, of course, we've got to make a remark about the hassle issue, which I'm not going to discuss, but of course I want to acknowledge it, right? If you're a Tesla owner, you might think about the hassle of inconvenience, embarrassment, unsafety, or maybe even just having a neighbor who annoys you by saying, are you going to sell? Are you going to sell? To which the correct answer is, by the way, here's how I'm thinking about this ethically. I'd love to share it with you, and here it is. A little email, a little voice message. And if the neighbor still says, are you going to sell? Then you say, well, look, I've shared my process. And if you're going to react like that, then you are uncool. Have an uncool neighbor. With the expressive stuff, I don't want my name on the Tesla. You might raise the issue of ethical responsibility, but surely, Vlad, if I own a Tesla, I am ethically responsible for Musk's actions a bit. Because you made a video, right, where you posted around together with Thomas Mann, and you said that humans are by association responsible for the actions of their governments. And so the Russians are not guilty, but are responsible for Putin's war, including and indeed especially the oppositional Russians. So sure, but you've got to be realistic about this. While the answer is indeed, yeah, you are responsible for Musk's actions if you own a Tesla, but it's just a tiny bit. It's a tiny bit. You're responsible for so many other bigger things than that. So you've got to put it into a balance and understand that you have to pick and choose where you're going to sort of take concerted action on bits where you feel responsible, but it's not quite, it's not quite clear what you should practically do about it, right? So yes, you're responsible, but it's part of a wash of, 1,700 different types of ethical responsibility you are enmeshed in. And if you try to be systematic and rigorous in how you are accountable to each of these 1,700 different ethical pools, you're not going to be a human being, right? It's just going to be a kind of a misanthropic calamity. So, yeah, it's a bit of responsibility there, but that's life too, right? And that's why you might need to get a sticker if you feel bad about it. Then the question arises, but surely, even if we put aside any ethical responsibility, I just want to do the not in my name thing. And here I want to say, we live in a culture that has excessively prioritized expressive politics. We live in a culture that has excessively prioritized what I've called hyper-identity politics, making political issues intensely moral and making intensely moral issues all about identity. Now, understand that there's a risk that we've gone too far in this direction as a culture. And you don't need to feed into that more. So instead of saying, shouldn't put my name on it, ask another question. How do I feel in this car? If I don't feel good, more reason to sell. If I kind of feel okay in it, keep it. So don't make it about declaring your affiliation. Make it more listening to yourself about how you feel. And here there might be a difference between various instantiations of the Tesla fleet. So it might be that a lot of people feel comfortable in most Teslas because they look like generic vehicles, but not in the Cybertruck. And here I have some empathy, because I think that there are some good reasons to think that the Cybertruck is a kind of an instantiation of Elon Musk's floundering psychic interiority. And you don't want to be inside that. And you might feel like you're inside that when you're inside the Cybertruck. Sorry if you have one and you feel like that, and you don't feel like this, and I'm imposing this on you. But I do think there's something psychically entangled there with the Cybertruck that might not be there with the rest of the Teslas. Because it's so much a sort of emblem of the psychic interiority of a man who no longer controls his mind. So there I have more empathy. So see how you feel about that. Maybe you have a Cybertruck, you don't feel anything like this. So is it wrong to keep your Tesla? Absolutely not. It's probably right, but it has to be an individual decision based on your response to the sort of things we've talked about. Is it wrong to buy a Tesla now? No, I can't say it's wrong. There's pretty good reasons not to, but I can't say it's wrong. It has to be a personal decision, and what we want is to take on board some of the things we've put on the table and make ourselves more responsible, not by becoming more rigid, but by becoming more pliant and more exploratory and more conscious of how we are human, all too human, and how others are too, and how they deserve our compassion and sometimes our love. Lots of love.